Having gone through the entire text of the Kena Upanishad, in the sequence of the text, with his commentary, Sri Aurobindo now dedicates his last chapter, titled A Last Word, to a review of the entire Kena and its message, but approaching it the way the modern mind needs. The text of the Kena, being primarily an intuitive revelation, begins with the way an intuition works. What does the intuition do? You feel something. And as your attention turns to it, it reveals a little bit of itself. And in what it reveals, your attention turns to something and something more is revealed. And so you go as if from one insight to the next, not knowing where it will finally lead you, until finally the whole journey is revealed and you have a clear series of experiences that have shifted your state of knowledge or awareness. But the modern mind is not intuitive, it is rational. And the rational mind does not feel satisfied unless first it understands where you are going, how you are going to go, who's going to pay for the ticket, and whether it is safe. And so this need for rational structure changes the whole approach. In the way Sri Aurobindo presents now, he takes the same intuitive content of the Kena Upanishad and sequences it as relevant for the reasoning mind. First thing, he says, what is the framework of this whole discussion of the Kena? And the fundamental teaching rests on this idea that there are three states of existence. Now, unless this idea is given to you, if you just start reading the text of the Kena, the intuitive will still take you to an experience, but the rational mind will say, why are they talking about this? Why is it shifting here? Why is it shifting there? And we don't know where it's going. Here, Sri Aurobindo gives us the framework. There are three states of existence. And the whole Kena is really teaching you to make a journey. But among these three states of existence, what is the focus of the Kena? Where are you going to make your journey? Why is that important? So the first state of existence is our human and mortal. It is characterized by the sense of dualities. Everything here has a bright side, positive side, on the other side a dark side and negative side. You can keep shifting from one to the other unendingly. You can never get out of the bright side. You will always find the dark side returning. You can never free yourself from the dark side. You can never get out of the dark side completely. One or the other will eventually come to you. The character of this human mortal existence is that it is built on dualities. The next level of existence is what he has described as Brahman consciousness, which is the absolute of our relativities. Here in the human experience, we are always sliding. Because we are always sliding between the bright and the dark, anything that you experience can be called bright or dark depending on your context. When we were children, the teacher presented us this challenge. He drew a line on the blackboard and said, can you make this larger without touching it, without erasing it, without adding anything to the line? And eventually he showed us how he did it. He drew a line below it which was short. So now suddenly this became big. You draw below it a large line, this becomes small. And literally, it's not just to our mind's thinking, to our physical sense there is a shift. And this can be measured in the way the brain and the eyes work. It's not even at the level of conscious mental awareness. You have these things called optical illusions, where two lines are drawn, both are exactly the same length. The upper line ends with arrows like this, with the point and then inward. The other ends with head from the same point outward. If you look at it physically, you cannot convince your mind that they're exactly the same length. Somehow the addition of these two pictures on the side makes the mind think that the lower one is larger and the upper one is smaller. And this can be done in so many different ways. It is at a physical level of our sight itself that the illusion is created. How? By setting a context. You're unhappy, look at somebody who is on the brink of breakdown of his health with the most extreme illness, you have no reason to be unhappy. You are happy, we can show you something else which will make you feel so miserable that you will be unhappy for the rest of your life. Everything is relative. The character of this whole human experience is relativity, and therefore with it all the other chain of dissatisfaction, frustration, insufficiency, incapacity, etc. follow. But this next level, which he has called the Brahman consciousness, which is the absolute of our relativities, here we find something which is absolute. A joy which is without needing an opposite. A strength which is without needing a relative or limitation. If you try to think about what that is like, you do not find anything in your human experience which can correspond to it. It's difficult to draw an example where we have experienced that, except occasionally. Sometimes you can say, once in a while in your life it has happened. For some reason, out of the blue, I felt something so blissful, so happy, so wonderful, I have no emotion to compare it with. And then it went away. And so you have a few references like this. But how did you get to that? Why did you drop out of it? Can you get it back? No answer and no access. And yet, it was there. Even if we have not had such an obvious experience, somewhere in our mind, in our intuitive parts, where we are not fully conscious, we feel it should be possible. Every one of us knows that it is possible to have true happiness. It is possible to have real lasting peace. It is possible to be free in a way that nothing can bind you, to experience true lasting love. All these are as if ideals for the mind. But as ideals, if you try to give them a form, create a movie scene, write out a story in which that true freedom, true love, true peace, true power, true happiness are played out. Impossible. The moment you put it into human terms, the moment you put it in a context which is in the relativities, you'll always find some deficiency, some lack. And yet we feel it should be possible, it's close, we will find an ideal society, an ideal life, an ideal whatever. So this is indicating to you that some higher part of us has a glimpse or an access to this consciousness, which he has described as the Brahman consciousness, which is the absolute of our relativities. It's as if all these relativities and dualities point to that absolute which is there, but outside the domain of our experience or even visualization of mind. And this is called the absolute of our relativities, because there is a continuity from this to that. And then there is the third level, third state of existence, which is the utter absolute, which is unknowable. When the same Brahman turns away from relativities, turns away from forms, turns away from any limitation, and declares itself free of any description. And this obviously you can never know, because knowing means to put or limit or acquire in some domain of experience that is beyond all experience which can define it. These three are the three levels of existence which are the first, let's say, basis of the whole journey of the Kena Upanishad. So the rational mind, setting this framework, now sets a context in which we understand why the Kena is talking like this and where it is leading us. The next step of the logic is, if we are to get beyond this limited human experience where we find ourselves frustrated and bound and limited, what is it that we point to? What is it that we seek to realize? Not that unknowable Brahman, because it is beyond our grasp, although it is the same reality as the second, which is the knowable Brahman, the absolute of our relativities. So we put our attention on this, the same Brahman, which is the absolute of our relativities. But remember, it's the absolute of our relativities. It means there's a connection from that to our relativities. And that is why the Kena begins with, what is it that is in our relative which points to that, or which is a representation of that? What is the mind of our mind, speech of our speech, life of our life, or sense of our sense? But what does it mean to shift from this existence to that? Does it mean we abandon this existence, or from there do we include this existence? What is the nature of that experience as distinct from this? So first Sri Aurobindo deals with this question. The attainment of the Brahman is our escape from the mortal status into immortality, by which we understand not the survival of death, but the finding of our true self of eternal being and bliss, beyond the dual symbols of birth and death. So when we shed our body, we are not really reaching to that. All we have done is shifted levels of the duality. From a gross physical body, we have shifted into a subtle body. And in the subtle body also you have the same dualities, more complex, more rich, more fascinating perhaps, more engaging, less narrow, less rigid, but still dualities. So you can take birth again, move out of birth, back and forth. You have not changed your consciousness. So what is meant by immortality is the finding of our true self of eternal being and bliss, beyond the dual symbols of birth and death. Behind both, what is it that is moving back and forth into gross body, into subtle body, and back and forth? That is our true being, our eternal being, and our eternal bliss. Why is it that we do not live in it? Why is it that we are somehow bound in this surface duality? Because our consciousness has engaged itself and bound itself to such a degree that it has forgotten what it was. So, this awakening is the liberation. That's why he uses the word escape. It's as if there is a whole complex machinery of life, of nature, which keeps us hypnotized and forgetful of our true nature. It's so fascinating. This is so interesting. That is so interesting. You see a little child when he is busy playing and completely immersed in the play, you keep changing the interests. He forgets to eat. He forgets where he is. He forgets who he was. And the same thing happens in a more sophisticated way from the time that we enter this experience of duality. And that's why, because it is almost like a prison which compels you, which binds and traps you, Sri Aurobindo uses the word escape. The attainment of the Brahman is our escape from the mortal status into immortality. But that immortality is not disconnected from this. It actually allows you to play the game more freely. And that's what he explains now. By immortality, we mean the absolute life of the soul, as opposed to the transient and mutable life in the body, which it assumes by birth and death and rebirth, and superior also to its life as the mere mental being who dwells in the world, subjected helplessly to this law of death and birth, or seems at least by his ignorance to be subjected to this and to other laws of the lower nature. So there are two very important ideas here he presents. First, that this poise, when you come to the absolute of our eternal being and bliss and self, this absolute is not disconnected from the relativities. It is Brahman from his poise of absolute embracing his relativities. And so the continuity is maintained. You are not outside life. You have now an absolute life. You have now an eternal life and a blissful life, while still playing the game of birth and death. It does not mean that you have withdrawn from that. It means you are now free of the compulsion. And when you're free of compulsion, then you can play the game as Lord, not as puppet. And so there is an absolute life. And the absolute life has an absolute mind, which is not like our narrow mind. It has an absolute sense. It can experience the whole universe, but from its absolute senses. And it has also the full experience of the absolute speech, which is the full creative power to express whatever it wants. So the whole thing is a shift from the transient and mutable life in the body to the absolute life of the soul. So let's dwell on this idea a little bit. Who is living your life? When you ask yourself this question, you wake up in the morning, you go through a mechanical routine, you take your shower, you sit down and prepare your food or eat your food, get into a vehicle to travel, you get down to work, and then by the time you come back, you're exhausted. How many times in the day, let's say from morning when we woke up till now, were you conscious of what you're doing and making a conscious choice to do it? Mostly everything we did was done by an unconscious impulse. Old habit. When you eat, your hand is moving, your mouth is chewing, your mind is somewhere else. Try as an experiment to stop, become fully conscious of the food before you, with a full conscious awareness, pick up the spoon, place it in your mouth, and with full consciousness taste every morsel and chew consciously. It is an exercise which is difficult to maintain because every now and then your mind will wander. So the question is, who was living the life when it was this mechanical life? Who is living the life when you're doing it consciously? You notice the center of I has shifted from what was earlier a semi-mechanical, half-hypnosis, somnambulism, sleepwalking state, to a conscious mental awareness with a conscious choice which can say, this food I will chew 10 times instead of 5 times. This food tastes good, but I will enjoy it more, not swallow it quickly. And you choose to participate in the enjoyment rather than, oh yeah, it's good, and you move on. This ability to make a choice comes from the shift of who you are to a center which is of a greater freedom. What if now you were able to shift from this center to a still greater freedom? What if you are actually able to make a choice where you could shape your thoughts, shape your body even, and make them do whatever you wanted freely, without any limitation? Let's say you're tired at the end of the day, because that's all that your body can do. What if you could consciously infuse in your body all the energy necessary and not get tired? What if in your mind you could infuse all the knowledge and clarity that you need for a given situation, withdraw or amplify as necessary? You can imagine now what it would be like to have a greater mind or a greater life energy and greater experience and enjoyment. But still that is in the domain of the relatives. A step further, in which you realize yourself neither the person who is in the body nor the person who is out of the body, but one who chooses to switch between these states, then you come close to this poise, which is the absolute life of the soul, opposed to the transient and mutable life in the body, which it assumes by birth and death and rebirth. As soon as you enter the birth, death, rebirth, you have engaged yourself and bound in that experience. You step behind it and you discover you have a far greater freedom, including the freedom to enter the body, including the freedom even to shape your body and to exit when necessary as needed. That freedom would be a far greater freedom, we can see. And this is what brings you to the poise of the absolute life of the soul. Now, there are people who have had spontaneously the recall of their past lives. There are some very interesting descriptions which you will find. And there is one book in particular of somebody we know who has written the memories that came to her when she was 18. She just one day had memories of her past life, and over the years, other memories came back. She went to validate some of those memories, going to those places in the world. Over time, she saw how all the special developments of each life were joining into the current life and its work, and even a sense of what the future life would bring. Now, all of this sense is natural to the psychic being, the soul, who chooses to enter. But is possible to the soul only when it is sufficiently awakened and becomes sufficiently mature. This is the inevitable experience which all of us will have as we grow into that soul's maturity, and as the gap between the soul and our surface waking consciousness becomes thinner by deep inward concentration which bridges the gap. Now, all of this would still leave you in the domain of the mutable life, but with a touch of the immortality, not yet in the full freedom of immortality. There is a step further which breaks out into the full immortality. And so that's where he says, superior also to its life as the mere mental being who dwells in the world. In this oscillation, you've shed your body, you are now in the subtle body, you've taken on a new birth. Who are you? You're still the mental being. As long as you're bound in mentality, you do not have the true absolute of the Brahman and the true freedom of eternal being and eternal bliss. So there is a step back in consciousness itself, in which you become free from this subjection to the lower nature. And this is what he describes in the second line. Dwells in the world subjected helplessly to this law of death and birth. We are as if carried by a tide. Now the body breaks down, okay, now I'm kicked out of the body. I didn't want to leave, but the body broke down so much it kicked me out, and now I'm in my subtle body. I go into a kind of a rest, and then from the rest I'm pulled back to take birth again. Of course, there's a sense of choice, but limited choice. But I'm pulled back helplessly. Throughout this, I am still an awareness which is largely mental, with some component of that eternal consciousness supporting behind. And it says, or seems at least by his ignorance to be subjected to this and other laws of lower nature. It seems because actually behind this, there is still the eternal part. But you are not aware of it. It is aware of you. It chooses. Now, as an example, if you read experiences of near-death experiences, people who have died on the operating table and then come back to life, one of the common things they will describe is, I found myself floating, then I found myself pulled through a passage, and then I found myself somewhere. And always it was happening. They didn't choose. They had no memory also of where they were going. But it all felt good. It all felt so nice. Who was making them move, get pulled, go there or here? Some part of the soul was exerting a choice. It was choosing, it was moving, and the consciousness which is registering, which is the mind, does not know where the choice is made. I felt myself pulled. I found myself there. I experienced this wonderful, blissful state. And then I found myself back in the body. And I was pulled back. Who pulled you or who chose to push you, you're not aware. If you were the chariot, if you are in modern context, the car, I feel my wheels turning to the right. I feel myself speeding up. I feel myself slowing down. I don't know the driver who's pushing the accelerator or turning the wheel to make my car move. It's something like this. We are an expression of that. That is leading our journey, but we are not conscious of that. And this shift is the awakening of your consciousness, breaking free from this surface identification to recover you truly as master, as the one who chooses, who is not actually bound to these laws, accepts to participate in the appearance of minding. And so he says next, to know and possess its true nature, free, absolute, master of itself and its embodiments, is the soul's means of transcendence. How do you become free? How do you transcend this duality and live your divine life? Well, you have to know and possess the true nature. Free, absolute, master of itself and its embodiments. So he's describing this true nature. But what do you have to know of? So he describes the true nature first as free, because it can choose without any compulsion. Even if there is a compulsion of nature making my body this or that, or my mind this or that, I am not bound to those limits. Second, absolute. Whatever the dualities of the play in my experience, in my awareness, I see them as a continuum. I am never bound to relativity. I always live in a bliss which is absolute, in an existence which is absolute, happiness, awareness which is absolute. And then master. This is the third character of this true nature. Master of what? Itself and its embodiments. Meaning you can choose what you are and where you go and what you do, but even when you take on an embodiment, you can choose what embodiment and how to work on it, what to work through it. To the extent that the embodiment is plastic enough, you can even infuse into it things which were not there. We take an analogy here. The analogy is of a child who is playing a computer game. So when he is playing the game, let's say, typically what children play, you are overcoming some challenges. If you miss overcoming a challenges, you get knocked out and you die in the game. And die means you restart. And again, you continue. This time, when you continue, you have acquired more skill because of the first experience. So this time you know how to manage that new situation which was surprising you. You are able to bypass it. And then again, a situation comes which is too much for your current skills. You get knocked out, you die, and you restart. Each restart is now from a poise of greater capacity. Each time you are able to go further with greater confidence. But after a certain point, you say, enough of this game. Now I want a game which challenges me on a higher level. You switch games. And again you go through a series of lives in the game. You switch game, again a series of lives. But all this while you find you are bound to the scope of the game itself. If the game requires you to be running all the time, jumping across hurdles, well, that's all you can do. If this game requires you to fly a plane and shoot other planes, that's all you can do. But the true freedom is when you step out of it and say, I can create my own game. I am the programmer. I write my own free game. You see the sense of freedom this offers compared to choosing which game. So if you take this analogy as this journey of the human soul, well, we went through many life forms in the evolution of our soul. We have been through many animal forms also, until eventually we came into the human form. In each of these forms, we had a series of lives in which our consciousness grew small steps. But the true freedom of the absolute life is when we can, from that free consciousness, choose even the body and reshape the body, change the rules of the game, or introduce a greater freedom which was not there before. And so he says, to know and possess its true nature, free, absolute, master of itself and its embodiments, is the soul's means of transcendence. And to know and possess this is to know and possess the Brahman. This is the poise which would be the poise of the Brahman consciousness embracing its relativities. Now, in the whole sentence, he has used this couple of words, to know and possess, 3 times. And now we need to see what's the difference between the two. You see, first he says, to know and possess its true nature, free, absolute master of itself and its embodiments, is the soul's means of transcendence. Then he says, and to know and possess this is to know and possess the Brahman. When he is repeating something already so many times, you must now look at why. What is the difference between to know and to possess? We touched upon it earlier in some earlier discussions, but it's worth repeating in this context. In our mind, we can know many things. I know, for example, to take a very mundane example, I know that I am on a tall building. When I look down, I'm not going to fall. But when I lean down, I experience fear. I don't possess the freedom or the safety, the security. I know I'm secure, and yet I can't help it. A child is asked to jump from a height of 3 meters into water. He has seen 100 people jump before him. He knows there's no reason to worry. Nobody is hurt. And yet, I do not possess that knowledge or the truth that the knowledge represents. I experience fear. You stand before a caged tiger and the tiger roars. You jump back in fear. You know that it is safe, but you do not possess the safety. Now this you can extend into academic space. I have learnt all these formulae of my engineering training. I can apply the formulae, but the difference between knowing the formula and possessing the formula is when you can erase the memory of the formula and I can recreate the formula because I possess the truth that it represents. You see, there are many things which we have forgotten. But if you have possessed it in your consciousness, you are one with it. I may have forgotten the formula, but give me a few minutes, I will recreate the formula because I possess the thing which was already there, which it represents only. Most of modern education is only superficial knowledge of formulae. You do not possess the knowledge, the experience which they represent. True education is that which gets you to that experience of the knowledge. You may forget all the terms, all the formulae, but given a challenge in life, you can express yourself and articulate whatever is required to master the situation. But this is true also, now to a more deeper example, in our experience of ourselves. I know from my reading of the Upanishad that I am free, I am an immortal soul. And yet, when somebody close to me has died, I weep. Somebody else comes to me and pacifies me and says, you know, the soul is immortal, the soul has now gone into a better place, the person is happy. Yes, I know, but I can't help it. I'm miserable right now. I'm feeling sad. I feel lost. You see the difference between knowing and possessing. Knowing is a superficial part. The possessing is when you are it from inside out. One who possesses that mastery can walk through the danger utterly secure. Not for a moment, even a tiniest ripple of fear, because he knows and possesses that security. And such would be the implication here of our true nature. I know my true nature when I've had experiences of it. I've had glimpses of it in meditation, in some altered state of consciousness, or in some special alignment where I feel the immortality of the soul somehow supporting. But when the challenge comes of the life, the pressure of the dualities, that which I know there is unable to actualize here. There is a gap between that and this. Possession is when I'm seated in that, and from there I engage with the world. Nothing can take away that which I am. So being in the true nature in possession means living from it. You are the true nature, and the lower nature, if at all, is only a superficial expression on the surface. As another example of this, when the mind is able to disengage from body. Now I know I'm mind, but my identification with the body is so strong, if you poke me, I go, oh, it pains. But when my mind is in possession of itself as distinct from body, it can hold back, and you can poke my body all you want, and I'll say, yes, it's paining, but my mind is not disturbed. My mind is not in pain. It is the body that is in pain. I possess my mind fully at this point. If you see many kinds of training which aim to give you that resilience of your mental character building, they often put you through extreme physical distress to compel this kind of separation. It's a crude way, even cruel way, but spiritually one would do this by a conscious process of disengaging and learning to stabilize your awareness in the freedom of the mind, or a higher poise of the mind in a spiritual status of consciousness, from where you can live with the full physical experience, not being deceived by its sensations or limitations. So this know and possess being repeated indicates that there is a passage from knowing to possessing. Before you can possess, you must have the knowing to some degree at least. In the knowing itself, there are gradations. As an example, anybody who has read even the idea that I am not body and mind, but I am soul, just that knowledge already brings a certain degree of freedom. This is what it is. It awakens deep inside a resonance with your intuitive parts which have it, of which you are not conscious. Then that thing can grow in you. It dawns in you. Over time, as you dwell upon it more and more, something in you grows to be more aligned to that truth than the surface appearance. A kind of a gradual passage of deeper knowing and deeper knowing, until eventually glimpses of what it's like to possess partially, until eventually it will stabilize, enter the possession, drop out a few times, and finally stabilize into the full possession. Even possession may be partial at first and then grow until it stabilizes. We may take the example of Ramana Maharshi, who attained to self-realization in 3 days. It was a sustained concentration. In 3 days he reached it. He had the consciousness of the self. And then he says, it took him 10 years to stabilize this as his poise in the midst of all activities. Now, all activities includes even sleeping, waking, and everything else you do, including sudden provocations, sudden challenges of extreme kinds also. Sri Aurobindo himself describes an unusual thing which indicates how much work this may take. In his own consciousness, Sri Aurobindo had not only established himself in the Satchidananda and the supermind, but he had established that consciousness in his mind, life energies, and even in the body consciousness, to whatever extent at that point under various stages of his journey. In the physical consciousness, he lived in the what was at first he described as the overmental, and increasingly the supramental influence entering it. And at that point, already in the body, he was immune to the dualities. His physical tissue and senses were able to transcend the dualities and experience the touch of Ananda in every contact. And then came an unusual experience. 1938, he had this massive accident where he fell and shattered his thigh. It was, as the mother explained, an attack, because you don't shatter your thigh just from a fall from a height of barely 1 foot or 2 feet. But then he says he sat there quietly for a few minutes. The intensity of the pain of shattering of the thigh, you can imagine what that can be like. The intensity is enough to an ordinary person to knock you unconscious. Because your awareness and your sensations, your nervous system and brain cannot take the intensity of that pain, you would just be knocked out. And that's the way the body and the brain manages that kind of intensity. Not only he was fully conscious, he waited, and he said the intensity was so great, at first it took him a little while before he could convert it once again to Ananda. You see the challenge. In the physical body, when the impact of the pain was so high that the nervous system itself cannot normally take it, he lost that poise of the Ananda perception. And it took him a few minutes to bring that back. And then after that, he reached out, and mother came, and everything was taken care of. In the subsequent process of the doctors working on the leg, he was put in a hard plaster, which leg had to be kept raised up for a while. He did not need any of the normal, to make it numb? The anesthetics. He did not need the normal anesthetics. We have a similar example of Ramana Maharshi doing surgery without anesthetic on a cancer. And he was asked to keep the leg up. He said, no problem, he will do it. No strain, no complaint, no sign at any point of pain after that. He went through whatever physical procedures were required for the body's healing. Of course, working upon it from a spiritual poise. Never a sign of pain or complaint or discomfort of any kind. Because that was established in the body. And even he gave to that whole experience a positive turn by saying, well, it was an experience where the body's capacity was pushed to the limit, whether the Ananda could be established in the physical to that extent. And there are other such experiences in the lives of people who have been established in that consciousness. But this gives you the sense of what it's like to be in possession. So in his consciousness, he was in possession of that on all the levels of the mind, life force, even in the subtle physical. In the most gross physical part, there was a tiny gap, which also the accident exposed, upon which he worked. So the sense of knowing and possessing, we understand not so much in two very distinct phases, but as a continuum. Because any experience, you can know it partially and then know it more completely. Meanwhile, a part of you begins to possess partially and then possess more completely. And so the two can never be separated, especially in the nature of the integral yoga, where all the parts of our nature are to be taken up into the yoga. There's always something which has gone much more and other things which are taking their time. To possess entirely, completely, in total mastery may take time, but you may have a poise of possession in some part of your consciousness, to some degree at least. And that's why he does not separate these two words. It is to know and possess its true nature. Free, absolute master of itself and its embodiments is the soul's means of transcendence. And to know and possess this is to know and possess the Brahman. It is also, there's another implication of this. It is also to rise out of the mortal world into immortal world. So all this while, the person who was experiencing things was this surface mind. Increasingly, as this shift takes place, and I am entering first the knowledge and then the possession of that freedom, I am entering the knowledge and possession of the immortal consciousness. And with the immortal consciousness comes the experience of the immortal world. Where is that immortal world? Not outside the body, right here. Where is the higher consciousness? Right here, in the world. In my awareness, the higher consciousness dawns. And with that higher consciousness, I experience the whole world. So where is it? Right here. My mortal world has now shifted and become, with the immortal consciousness, the immortal world. Out of world of bondage into world of largeness. While earlier I was trapped in the limitations of my body and my limitation of energy and the ignorance of my mind and all the illusions that it creates of my myself and of the world, I now dawn into a world of largeness. Everything is free. Everything is wide. I am no more bound in these limitations. And where is this taking place? Here in my consciousness as I experience world. With this widening from bondage to largeness, largeness is not only bondage in range of capacity of the body or mind, but also range of perception of consciousness. So I open out and become conscious also of the subtle layers of my own consciousness, the subtle worlds which interpenetrate the physical world. And so, instead of being bound in a narrow experience, I'm liberated into a large experience. When I look at the flower and the trees, I see not only what they are in appearance physically, but also the working of their energies and the working of the consciousness behind those energies and all the subtle beings who work to assist the growth of the plants. Even in my experience of the physical flower itself, I see much more than what normally the human eyes and senses would see. I see the flower as it is, across space and across time. It's an experience which one can describe in this way. The normal experience, you buy the flower, this is what it is. I know it for what it looks right now. But the liberated consciousness, even a little bit, and it does not have to go all the way to the absolute, the liberated consciousness a little bit sees not just this, but the full chain of the flower blooming from the tree, it being plucked, it being sold, it being bought, it being gifted, it being placed, and the joy of the flower in this whole movement. And further process. After this, it will fade out eventually. It will be put into a box, then it will be put into the soil. It will become manure and flow back into the cycle of materials in nature. In looking at this and holding it, the full awareness of this entire cycle of what it holds in itself is there. And behind it, the moment you have an experience like this, behind it you see the full flow of life, of which this is a special front. And such an experience is a world of largeness. Everything is large. Everything is part of the whole. And from this, he gives one more step. Out of finite world into infinite world. Even with this, there is a finiteness. All the things of the flower, the shape of the flower, the stages of it are all finite forms. The consciousness awakening to become infinite now looks at the world and sees everything as an expression of the infinity. You do not see finiteness anywhere, finite appearance of something which is infinite. So when now you hold the flower, you experience the flower as the entire universe infinite, drawn into a special front, as if you take a cloth sheet place it, a large tarpaulin or a sheet on the table, pick one point of it in the center and pull it up. The entire cloth drags slightly as you pull up this center. The flower is this center pulled up of the entirety of the universe. The entire universe leaning to present a front, and I see and meet the universe in flower and as flower. And what is it? The consciousness of the flower? The entire consciousness of the universe in and as consciousness of flower. And the joy and bliss of flower? The entire universe's bliss to put forward this special form of a blissful flower. Why? Because my consciousness is infinite. I am able to now perceive the infinity behind and within all finite appearances. So this he describes as out of finite world into infinite world. And where is this infinite world? Here, right now. Your consciousness becoming infinity, you live in infinity of experience. Now these he has described in 3 stages. First, rise out of mortal world into immortal world. Second, rise out of bondage into world of largeness. And third, rise out of finite world into infinite world. You will recall a prayer which comes from the Veda. Asatoma satgamaya, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. From asat, from non-being, lead me to true being. From ignorance, darkness, lead me to light. From death and limitation, lead me to immortality. Something very similar here, not the same verses, there are similar elements also. So the first is from mortal world into immortal world. Second, from world of bondage to world of largeness. And third, world of finite into world of infinite. Now you will see here, all 3 are in fact vocabularies of the Veda. From the mortal to immortal is the same as the prayer which we spoke of. Mrityormam amritam gamaya. From mrityu to amritam. From mortality and limitation to immortality. But the bondage to largeness corresponds to this term brihat in the Veda. The supermind and its super life is described as the truth, the right, and the vast. Satyam, Ritam, and Brihat. And you enter into a consciousness of largeness. Again, you may have stages to it, doesn't matter. But the last one, from finite world into infinite world, is the term Mahas. A consciousness which is supermind, which is infinity, which is the super life, lives from there, and everything is experienced as infinite. And so this is rising from this poise to that poise, but where? Here, in the world. Because really, once you have risen into that consciousness, it does not matter whether you're in physical body or subtle body. You shed physical body, people say you're dead, but you're just exactly where you were. You're in your subtle body. And then you take on physical body, people say you're born, but you are exactly where you were. You just took on this layer like clothing or shed it, and it makes no difference to you. It's a very interesting experience which was narrated to me by a mystic. And he said how his first awakening took place. He was just sitting on his chair one day, and then suddenly he experienced his consciousness shifting levels. And the physical world became transparent and dissolved, and he was in a subtler grade. And then that dissolved, and he was in a higher grade and a higher grade, all the way to his full awakening of consciousness, which he described as the self. And then from there he came back, all the way shifting, and he was in his chair with the physical world and physical appearances. And that was it. He just woke up, so to say, and experienced the shifting of level and back. And once you've had an experience like this, you can never be... First of all, the imprint of the self leaves you changed permanently, but you can never be deceived by appearances. You know there is all this behind. And so it does not matter. The body, birth, death has no relevance here. What you live is in the consciousness, which is immortal, large, infinite. With it, something else also happens. It is to ascend out of earthly joy and sorrow into a transcendent beatitude. You are in the consciousness which belongs to that, and therefore with it, its way of enjoyment is also your enjoyment. How is this to be realized? What does the Kena teach us as the means for making this transition? This is the description that Sri Aurobindo offers in the next paragraph. But before we take that up for next time, let's review the whole approach that Sri Aurobindo takes in this last chapter. He has now discarded the natural sequence of the Kena Upanishads' intuitive unfolding of experience. He steps back and offers a rational framework to the rational modern mind. What is the Kena teaching us about? What is its presupposition? There are 3 levels of existence. It is to this second level that we put our attention and focus. What is the nature of the change of consciousness when this takes place? And this is what has been described. And you see how logical and irrational it is. The Kena has not approached it this way. It has started with the intuitional of the experience. What is the mind behind your mind? What is the life behind your life? And that it teaches you is what is the nature of that life. That is mind of our mind. That too is life of our life and speech of our speech. All 4 merge into that one. But there sight travels not, nor speech, nor mind. We know it not, nor can distinguish how one should teach of it, for it is other than the known. It is there above the unknown. And so very quickly in the formulation, it brought you to the recognition that it is beyond your current range of consciousness. And yet it is the origin of all these, by saying in the next few verses, that which is unexpressed by the word, that by which the word is expressed, know that to be the Brahman. And in the same way with mind, that which thinks not by the mind, but that which is by which the mind is thought, know that to be the Brahman. That which sees not with the eye, but that by which the eyes seeing sees, that is the Brahman. That which doesn't hear with the ears, but by which the ears hearing is heard, that is the Brahman. And it doesn't breathe with the human breath, it is that which leads the human life. And so in the very first section of the Kena, it led you experientially to this recognition of something. Not giving it a vocabulary, not giving it an explanation, but simply an experiential glimpse, there is something. To that, Sri Aurobindo has now given us a full rational framework of explanation. The next step is, how does the Kena lead us to the experience of that? Again, it does not explain the method. It tells you, notice this which is of that. That of it which is you, that of it which is in the gods, that you must know, it says. And so you try to know it, and the experience leads you. But Sri Aurobindo explains now what is the mechanism of this transition. And that is the next step, the next paragraph. And he explains how you have to disengage from your attachment to the appearance of things, but put your attention on the thing behind the appearance, of which it is the appearance. And how to do that. We will see that in detail next Sunday. But for the moment, we can dwell on this theme. Dwelling on it in our consciousness, in our intuition, also helps to prepare the mind and open to the experience of it. So we reread this last 3 sentences. To know and possess its true nature, free, absolute, master of itself and its embodiments, is the soul's means of transcendence. And to know and possess this is to know and possess the Brahman. It is also to rise out of mortal world into immortal world, out of world of bondage into world of largeness, out of finite world into infinite world. It is to ascend out of earthly joy and sorrow into a transcendent beatitude.